The 9070 GRE, it launched like a year ago. And then it launched worldwide just a couple of days ago. Computex. I've got the Sapphire Pulse 9070 GRE. It is OC. It's a little OC. But it's launching worldwide, and it's available, and it's 12 gigs of VRAM. And this is kind of the answer to unavailability of other GPUs, like 16 gig GPUs. And maybe at also a better price point. $549. This is it. But like a lot of things, this launch has a lot of layers, like an onion. So let's peel that onion and talk about it. All right, so first up, this is physically a 2.5 slot card. It's got a pretty awesome flow-through design, given that it's not a super long card. So those of you that are rocking an older case, like the older, like the fractal cases that are kind of short, this would probably be a really good GPU for you, even if you've got an AIO cooler. Physically, it has 2 DisplayPort 2.1 and 2 HDMI 2.1 connectors. Now, before you Linux folks freak out about the HDMI and the substandard HDMI support on Linux, good news, everybody. AMD has won the war of attrition, and full support for the HDMI functionality is coming to Linux. That wasn't AMD's fault. That was the HDMI consortium. As a consumer, they do not work for your interests at all. So, got to keep an eye on them. Got to stay vigilant. Anywho, let's talk about Sapphire. All right, so this is a boost clock up to 2920 megahertz with a 2340 megahertz game clock. It's 12 gigs of 192-bit DDR5. It's 18 gigabit effectively. 3072 stream processors. It's RDNA 4, and there's 48 ray accelerators. Okay, but what does that mean in terms of thermals and benchmarks? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Well, we start with 3D Mark. Our test system here, Windows 11 25H2 on our Aorus X870E Aorus Master with a 9850X3D. Not the X3D2, just the 9850X3D with 32 gigs of DDR5 6000 thanks G-Skill CL28 kit, in case you're wondering. We take a quick look at our 3D Mark benchmarks. Our 9070 GRE Sapphire, 43,000. I've also included a 9070 XT for reference, as well as Sapphire's 9060 XT OC Nitro Plus. So that is a 9060, but it's a little overclocked. So it's a little better than your stock reference performance for a 9060. And remember, the RX 9070 GRE from Sapphire, Sapphire Pulse, that's launching at MSRP, which is, I think, $549. So usually the OCs, you get a little bit of a price bump, but remember, the GRE is meant to slot in between the 9070 and the 9060 XT. That's where it landed like a year ago. It's just now it's available worldwide. And this card is sort of expected to be a really nice 1440p card. I mean, you could do 4K, but you're going to be relying on upscaling and technologies like that. Maybe a little bit of frame gen. Depends on the title. So if we switch from Firestrike to Port Royal, we're scoring about 13,000. That's pretty nice. Speedway, about 4,000, 4,335. Steel Nomad, 5,401. And Time Spy, 20,875. This is a pretty good Time Spy result. Now, interestingly, the clock speeds on, as reported by Hardware Info 64, are not quite as aggressive as the XFX. But the Sapphire pulls ahead of the XFX. So maybe they push the 9070 GRE just a little bit too much. I mean, these scores are really close, but you'll see in the benchmarks. It depends on the game, and it depends on the particular situation and the tuning. I like the tuning that Sapphire has done here on this card, though. All right, let's start with the ancient Shadow of the Tomb Raider, because it's from the dawn of time, literally dawn of gaming time. Our 9070 GRE can manage 265 FPS with 202 for our 1% lows, and that is on the highest preset. If we enable ray tracing, we're still doing pretty good here at our highest 1080p setting, 180 FPS. If we switch to 1440p, our 9070 GRE from Sapphire, still 124 FPS. And if we ditch ray tracing, we can get that up to 183 FPS. At 4K, 96 FPS without ray tracing, and 64 FPS with ray tracing. 64 FPS, 4K on an older title like this, probably wouldn't elect to go highest. I'd probably use 1440p with upscaling and just upscale it to the native resolution of the monitor. So you get a nice OLED panel like this one, and then it's like, I want to run native 4K. But really, 1440p with upscaling, for my eye, generally, it's fine. And I'd rather have the higher frame rate, especially way above 60. Because I don't really like the 1% lows dipping down to 45 FPS there for 4K. Next up, Callisto Protocol. 206 FPS with 67 FPS for our 1% lows. That's the game, not the card, but still, that's a pretty good result. Stepping up to 1440p, our 1% lows are about the same as you'd expect, 174 FPS, and at 4K, 113 FPS. And this is on the Ultra preset. Final Fantasy XIV at 1080p, 222 FPS. At 1440p, it's 143 FPS, and at 4K, it's about 66 FPS. Another older title, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, but it has some performance quirks that are similar to other games from the genre and even some more recent games. Our Sapphire, 74 FPS at 4K, 145 FPS at 1440p, and 207 FPS at 1080p. This is a pretty solid result. Now, Monster Hunter Wilds has a lot of presets and a lot of different configurations. So our Sapphire, 104 FPS on Ultra at 1080p. If we step it up to Ultra with quality upscaling, it's 113 FPS. Quality upscaling with frame generation, we can get it up to 185 FPS. And this looks really good. Like, if you play this, this is a perfectly reasonable experience, especially on a high refresh display. Ultra with ray tracing, it is a little tough on these cards, 93 FPS at 1080p. If we do quality upscaling, we can get it back to 105 FPS because it's rendering at a slightly lower resolution. And if we do quality upscaling with frame generation, we can get 168 FPS. Now, this one, the gameplay experience was a little... you could definitely tell frame generation was going on in this configuration. I think that I would step down from Ultra, though, because like real world gameplay, if you just step down from Ultra, the frame rate wasn't dramatically higher, but the feel of the game, like the overall, I'm moving around, I've got a high refresh display, you can definitely feel that it's a little different. So don't be afraid to mess with the settings. But I like playing over 100 FPS on a very fast refresh monitor like OLED. Now, if we step it up to 1440p and we look at the Ultra preset, this is where I've it's like, oh, Ultra graphics quality. This is really nice. Yeah, 79 FPS with 52 for our 1% lows at Ultra. With upscaling, we can get it up to about 93 FPS with 59 for our 1% lows. This is a pretty good sweet spot. This is an island of awesomeness. If we turn on frame generation, we can get 151. This, for some reason, didn't feel as janky as the 1080p frame generation. And janky is maybe an overstatement of actual real-world gameplay experience. If we turn on ray tracing, it's 70 FPS on Ultra. With upscaling, we can get to 85, and with frame generation, about 140. Again, ray tracing plus Ultra plus frame generation, I don't know. It's fine, but it feels better in the other configurations. Maybe if I'd never experienced the other configurations, I wouldn't complain. At 4K, 46 FPS on Ultra. Not great. Ultra with upscaling, we can get to 57 FPS, but our 1% lows are still around 38, which is not awesome. And with frame generation, we can do 72 and 99. This actually didn't feel as bad as some of the other configurations. Maybe it was just some sort of weird uncanny valley. Now, when we turn on ray tracing, though, ray tracing at 4K was not an amazing experience. At 40 FPS with 28 for our 1% lows, even with upscaling getting us to 52 FPS, even with upscaling and frame generation getting us to 90 with 66 for our 1% lows, it was not fabulous. You can definitely see that if you've got a 90-70, your 90-70 experience here is a lot better. And I can definitely vouch for that. Maybe not experiencing this game at 4K on a 90-70, I might have a different opinion, but having the let's call it the 90-70 experience on this GPU and other lower resolutions and configurations was impressive at a $549 part, but 4K, no, I get why they say it's 1440p. That is a reasonable description of this card. It's like a 1440p AAA title. Yeah, and Sapphire is killing it here. Like, this is a really good configuration. This is a 2.5 slot card. The thermals on this card were fantastic, I think partly because of the flow-through design. It's got the dual 8-pin power, so it doesn't have the NVIDIA-style 8-pin power. I know some of you are militantly against the NVIDIA-style power connector, but you should know that style of power connector has been in use in servers since time immemorial. The problem with that connector is not the connector. The problem with that connector is the wattage through the connector. These are not 600 watt cards. Like 200, 300, 400 watts through that kind of a connector is fine. 500 or 600 watts through that connector, your margin for error is much, much reduced. So unless your connection is perfect, you will eventually have a problem with that connector when your wattage is on the higher side, towards 600 watts. But if you have a card like this with that kind of a connector where it's never going to draw 300 watts, that connector's fine. Manufacturing defects accepted, of course, like, oh, this one that was made wrong, or the connector was hanging halfway out, it melted. See? And it's like, well, that has happened with the 8-pin connectors as well. I mean, those were originally designed to support only 150 watts, and now they're, like 300 and 350 watts is sort of where they push to. Okay, well, 300 watts is technically the absolute maximum. The CPU version of it, the absolute maximum is 400 watts, but I digress. Let's get back to the benchmarks. All right, what about Borderlands 4? This doesn't look great because, wait a minute, our 9060 XT is only marginally slower than the 9070 GRE Sapphire? What's going on with that? Borderlands 4. That's what's going on with that. Borderlands 4 is such a weird game. I also might get distracted by actually playing Borderlands, so this is the very high preset, keep in mind, but let's step it up to 1440p. Okay, 1440p, yeah, this is looking a little better. 30 for our 1% lows and 47 for our average FPS. And 2160p, 24 FPS and 19 for our 1% lows. And again, there's really not a lot of difference here between a 9070 GRE and a 9060 XT, which is surprising, but that's Borderlands 4. Now, if you step down to any other preset other than very high and you do frame generation and you do all that, you can have a perfectly reasonable gameplay experience. But look, our 9070 XT is also 90 FPS. That is quite a bit better at 1080p. But at 1440p, look at the spread between the 1% lows and the average frame rate. Again, this game, not fabulous. Claire Obscure Expedition 33, the game can't fade from the limelight. It was too good. All right. So the 9070 GRE Sapphire, 62 FPS. That 9060 is really not doing a lot worse here on the Epic preset. But if we step it up to 1440p, this game's doing a lot better. And this is another one that would benefit from frame generation or other upscaling technologies, or maybe step it down a little bit from Epic. But this game was perfectly playable with the upscaling technologies. Now, 45 FPS is not great in a game like this, but definitely would like to have more FPS than that, moving through the map and doing that sort of thing. At 4K, 24 FPS on Epic, it's not playable. You don't want to play it on it. It's not fabulous. And finally, Cyberpunk. 154 FPS with 102 for our 1% lows. Yeah, maybe we can get the Cyberpunk optimization team on Claire Obscure, because Cyberpunk, when it came out, was janky AF, and it's much, much better now. And that's quite good, and that is a significant uplift over our 9060 XT. If we do Ultra with upscaling, we can get to 171 FPS with 114 for our 1% lows. And if we do quality upscaling with frame generation, we can get to 324 FPS. And on this monitor, this feels like butter. It was amazing. I didn't even feel like when you get a lot of explosions or like there's a lot of enemies on screen and you feel the frame dips. On this configuration, on this monitor, on high refresh OLED, it's great. Now with ray tracing, it changes the game a little bit. 65 FPS with 52 for our 1% lows. If we do quality upscaling, we can get it to 105 and 80. That's probably the sweet spot. If we do quality upscaling and frame generation, 201. Now I didn't play this preset long enough, but it seemed reasonable. So if you get this card and you try Cyberpunk and you do it with quality upscaling and frame generation, weigh in below. Like, what is your experience with that? Or hang out on the forum and let others know. I thought it was fine, but I haven't spent hours and hours and hours on this configuration on this GPU. Now, if we step it up to 1440p on Ultra, 101 FPS. So no upscaling, no frame generation technology. I think that is eminently playable. Whereas it's just barely playable on the 9060 XT at 1440p. With upscaling, we get to 115 FPS, and frame generation, we get back to 211 FPS. And again, on this monitor, markedly better picture, basically the same gameplay experience. This is probably what I would play. If we do ultra ray tracing, 40 FPS. Quality upscaling, we can get back to 70. Quality upscaling with frame generation, 132. This does not feel as good as the other configuration, and I don't mind not having the ray tracing eye candy at 1440p. So that's just me, but you may have other opinions, and feel free to weigh in and share below. Can we do 4K, 45 FPS on Ultra? No, I don't think so. Quality upscaling, 55 FPS. it's not bad. I mean, it's 1440p scaling it up, so it's a very similar experience with a little bit more driver overhead. And if we do frame generation 98 FPS, this was playable. I thought I could feel it a lot more when there's a lot of enemies on screen and when things kind of bog down because there's a lot going on screen. But I still thought it was playable. Like, you'd enjoy this, and the gameplay rendering stuff wouldn't be distracting if you were just trying to enjoy the game and sneak around and take out enemies and that sort of thing. Ray tracing 4K, not happening. 17 FPS, quality upscaling 35. Frame generation, if you want to experience the most janktastic frame generation, 60 FPS 4K ultra with quality upscaling, there you go. It's not great. So there you go. There's the RX 9070 GRE from Sapphire. Sapphire has done a particularly good job with the cooling and thermals and fan noise on this particular GPU. In a closed system, I could not hear the GPU over the rest of the system. On our open air test bench, I can definitely hear the fans ramping up and down as necessary. We didn't see a hotspot exceeding 95 degrees C on this particular card. Sapphire seems to have done a good job with the thermals, but there wasn't really enough time to do a super deep dive on that kind of a thing, or like audit the thermal paste or anything like that. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the card. 2 DisplayPort, 2 HDMI. Obviously, that's a thing that Sapphire has been doing to differentiate themselves. Linux users, of course, generally tend to prefer DisplayPort over HDMI, but the sea of that is changing a little bit because of the HDMI consortium and AMD sort of, I guess, coming to terms, and we'll see more full HDMI support on Linux very soon. Overall, yeah, that's pretty much the long and short of it for this one. If anything, the 9060 XT OC Sapphire Nitro Plus shows how well it has held up over time. I mean, this is a significant performance bump over the 9060 XT, but if you bought a 9060 XT a year ago, you've been enjoying AAA titles this whole time. And everybody that bought all their computer stuff a year ago is sort of laughing and mocking derisively at anybody that has to buy their computer gear now in sort of the middle of 2026 because everything is crazy. So the question is, will things be more crazy toward the end of the year or less? And it's sure looking like more right now rather than less. But we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Engage below. Hang out in the forum. I'm Wendell, Level 1. If you have any questions or I missed anything, or you want to show off your rig with this kind of a setup, or share your feedback on game benchmarking and like what your experiences were, let other users in our community know, we have the forum. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.